You're listening to the Quarter Podcast. My name is Natasha Mwewa. The Quarter Podcast is dedicated to empowering Zambia's civil servants through financial literacy, honest conversation, and the push for real change. This is part 2 of episode 1. If you caught part 1, you already know its importance. In part 1, we looked at the scale of civil servant indebtedness, what it is costing us in lost productivity, and how squeezed household incomes are quietly strangling our local economy. But we're not done. Welcome to part 2. In the second and final part, Mokafia continues his conversation with Mr. Robert Mookola MALASHA, National Treasurer for the Economics Association of Zambia. We ask what this debt crisis means for the stability of our entire financial sector. In addition, critically, what must our policymakers, regulators, and institutions actually do to turn this around? These questions move us from diagnosis to prescription, from understanding the problem to demanding solutions. If you have not listened to part 1 yet, we encourage you to go back and start there. However, if you are ready, let's get straight into it. Here is Mukapia with our guest, Mr. Malasha. You know who made it.
Hello and welcome to part 2 of this discussion. My name is Mukapia Chibamba Kayula. Mr. Malasha, welcome back. Civil servants are considered the safest borrowers because their salaries are guaranteed. But yet we are seeing rising non-performing loans, even in this supposedly low-risk segment. As an economist, what does it tell you about the health of our financial sector when even the most secure borrowers are defaulting? And what happens to the broader financial system if this continues unchecked?
Like I said, first of all, I'll start first thing first. We did, of course, we have to look at the strictures of numbers. We did say the civil servant
database,
yes, looks at about 3 to 5% of the GDP in terms of emoluments. What the civil servant is paid is about 3 to 5% of the GDP.
Exactly.
That's very important to understand. So when you're looking at interaction between the civil servers and the financial intermediaries in terms of the loan facility, the credit facility that they got, so they are interacting with 5% of the GDP. So
exactly.
Advancing facilities to this segment or civil service universe, and they're interacting with 5% of the GDP. Now, the impact of that is, I always want to refer things to GDP at the budget so that it's easier to appreciate how the conversation is going.
Exactly.
So if you're interacting with 5% of the GDP, that 5% has got a multiplier effect. What I mean by multiplier effect is that if you got 5% of the GDP and you invested some, for instance, in government bonds or treasury bills or any other financial vehicle tool that you might have, whether within or outside the country, there's a certain return you expect.
Exactly.
Okay. So if that be the case, it means that if these financial intermediaries are advancing their facilities to this particular segment and it's in default, the impact is that the NPL or the non-performing loans in that particular financial intermediary has an impact on the ability of those financial intermediaries to actually advance their facility to this particular segment or any other segment for that matter. Because here we're dealing with public sector workers, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that NPL is also monitored by the central bank. I think in the budget speech, the Honorable Minister Stumbeko Msokotwane did mention about the non-performing being would be sub 10% of the whole total loan book. That was the aim. Okay, so that you keep it within manageable levels. But within the banking sector itself or financial sector, it might be lower than that. It could be 5%. They don't want to have a lot of, unless you are a developed financial institution like the now former Development Bank of Zambia. Okay, where you get the long-term lending issues. But then, so because of that, the ability for that particular segment or financial intermediary to trust the civil service become eroded. So civil service becomes, even if they're sure way of repay, they become a high risk. So the pricing of the facilities to the civil service now becomes, you now embed the risk component into it.
So it becomes higher.
It becomes higher. So for the civil servant now to actually access these facilities, even if you're not very indebted, it will be more expensive for you to access that facility than it was before because of the total behavior of the civil servant being a high risk client in terms of repayment. So it becomes much costlier to you as a civil servant collectively, which means now you've got, for the same amount you would have borrowed at 2%, now you have to borrow it at 5%, 10%. So meaning whatever you wanted to use that facility for, you have to borrow more to actually just meet something that you would have met with less at some point. So your projects, maybe you're enhancing your farm, whatever you're doing, you have to borrow much more, and it's much more costly to you. And the impact on your pay scale now even is much more. Then the issues we've just discussed before this point play in. Now Mr. K will be running away. We're not even be coming to the office.
So, Mr. Malasha, does that explain the reason why? Because at the moment, if you go to borrow money, I think the cost of borrowing has gone up. So does your point explain why this is the case?
Well, the cost of borrowing from the bank, the way banks price their money or their product, let me call it a product, because banks don't want to call it money.
Yes.
Their product is varied. Okay. There is also the cash ratio, which the central bank always requires that the banks maintain with the central bank. And I think it moved from 17% to about 26%. Basically meaning for every kwacha that the bank holds, okay, 26% of that kwacha should be at the central bank. So the financial intermediaries can only lend out about 78% of whatever for every kwacha they hold. They can only lend out 78 ingwe, because 26 ingwe is with the central bank. Every kwacha from 17%. Is it making sense?
Yeah.
So meaning, instead of lending out when it was at 17%, they would have lent out maybe 83 kwacha, 83 ingwe. Now it has moved from 83 ingwe to 78 ingwe. Okay, so there's lesser money they can actually avail to you than was before. So that is now the cash management ratio. So that is statutory, and there's nothing the financial intermediaries can do. That's number one. Two, they also factor in risk in terms of pricing the product, depending on which segment. So certain sectors are more riskier than others, so they'll put in the risk factor to price their product. The other one is, of course, inflation and perhaps the appetite to absorb that risk. So now, in the case of behavior, as would have said the public sector, in terms of workers
defaulting
embeds into that. And just to ring fence themselves, they would maybe press it higher, and at some point they will say, okay, for this facility we need more, we need collateral. Okay, they'll even put in such conditionality. This should have been an advance or a personal loan, which is 6 months or whatever. Now we even for the 6 months they ask for collateral. It's almost like you're going to loan sharks. So that, yes, to answer your question, it could have had an impact, but there are other macroeconomic factors which would have impacted their pricing of the product.
Okay, thank you very much. And lastly, I want to ask a question which borders on policy. Given everything that we have discussed, productivity losses, suppressed domestic demand, and financial sector risks, what is the single most urgent structural intervention that Zambia needs right now? I'm not talking about a financial literacy campaign, but a fundamental policy or regulatory change that would begin to reverse this crisis at its root.
I'll respond without trying to sound political. I'm not a politician. I think I'm more of a technocrat than that.
Appreciated.
So my response should not be taken in that light. I think this one requires a very honest approach to it. Remember when we started, we said that you needed to needed to dissect this debt into whether it's bad or good debt. And also, we need to understand what is the behavior of civil servants borrowing. Where are they taking the money? If somebody could have that data and say, okay, it's just for consumption, domestic consumption, or they're investing, or if they're investing, I think blessed are we if they're doing that.
Exactly.
But if it's just for consumption, and that consumption which does not inspire any reflows of income, then there's a big problem. So why are they just consuming? You'd ask yourself. That is very important. I think between 2018 and 2021, there was a conversation which was very active in the civil service. It was the issue of debt swap.
Yeah, debt swap, yes, I remember.
In the civil service and the financial intermediaries. Because the observation which was made then was that, listen, many civil servants are highly indebted. In their offices, you just find the jackets hanging over there. Hanging over there,
people are gone.
People are gone, not because they're
doing side hustles,
field work. No.
Yeah.
But it was avoidance. And this enterprise is so big that even your supervisor can't manage to be monitoring where you are. You say, no, I was at the registry. No, I went to China. No, I need. But all that, if you really segmented it, you understand that somebody has just been avoiding to be in one place because people know where they work. And that kind of a thing. So to avoid that was impacting on the delivery of public goods and services.
Exactly.
What now the policy is a 24-hour economy of improving the service delivery. That was a huge issue. And it's a huge cost. And unfortunately, that cost is not quantified. As an accountant, I think those are the things we've been grappling with to say, how do you quantify this cost and can it be represented in on the profit and loss or the balance sheet of the country, so that you know the impact. You have got inflows there, then you say because of idle time, this is how much it's costing us. So this idle time is taking us into a loss. So that you now pay attention to the idle time. And one of the strategies I think which was being done then was to manage the debt of a civil servant in Zambia, and the people who were thinking through that came up with the position of a debt swap. How do we freeze this position to say, okay, we're going to swap this debt. Boma owes you so much, and you also, our members of staff owe you so much. Can we freeze this? So that now, going forward, we have got now what you call a very strong financial viability test. Before you contract any debt, you as Mr. K, you want to contract debt with, I won't mention banks. Any bank. Before you do that, you come to my office. I do the financial viability test on you, and I say, no, you don't qualify, or you qualify for so much, or you already have this contracted debt, then you don't qualify. And this memo would be across, while we have already frozen the amount that you're owing to this financial intermediaries, then these financial intermediaries have agreed to say, okay, at the time he's leaving office, or in the next 3 years, it will now become active as you are paying towards the old debt while servicing the new. So that it's easier because now you don't have to run away from the office.
Exactly.
For me, I would have thought that was the basis of that particular conversation. Like I said, I'm not a politician. I am just looking at the numbers, and I'm a numbers person. I think to pursue that matter would be would be in our best interest. We relook at what that was aiming to do. We relook at whether it was going to benefit the country as a whole or members of staff, and we just dissect it objectively and say, okay, is this beneficial to the country? Will public service delivery in terms of public goods and services be enhanced as a result of this debt?
Exactly.
If that's the case, then for me, I'll support it.
Okay.
If it's just a window dressing matter, then I don't know. So from a policy position perspective, you may need to hive off the debt so that you give a bit of relief. The same way we are doing with the IMF negotiations, with the multilateral creditors, they give you a bit of leg room and give you a bit of relief. It's the same formula you'd use even for members of staff. Besides, civil servants are ambassadors of government, whether in employment or out of employment. They're still ambassadors of government. And there's some level of commitment we have to have towards the service that they've done, and also try to manage that. It's not, and Zambia civil service is one of the most educated civil working class in Zambia. They've got all the, so when I remember we spoke about this before we even started this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether it's an issue of financial literacy, because these are experts in their own.
It's a high level.
So you tell them financial literacy, or even tell you who wrote the book. But financial literacy, that's a kind of cluster or cadre of intellectuals that you're dealing with. So it's a behavioral issue. It's a peer pressure issue. It's deeper than what we see. So we have to deal with those issues. So that policy framework, I think, is something that we supported. Perhaps the conversation that we've had just now in terms of policy direction could be one of the considerations we have. Okay. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, no. You've actually dissected everything very clearly. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's conversation, and what a conversation it has been. To our guest from the Economic Association of Zambia, thank you for lending your expertise and your voice to this critical national discussion. You have helped us see clearly that what civil servants are experiencing is not just personal misfortune. It is a macroeconomic wound that affects every Zambian. To our listeners, I thank you for coming back. Until next time, it's goodbye.
And that brings us to the end of part 2 of episode 1. Thank you for giving us your time. We know your time is precious, and the fact that you chose to spend it with us means everything to us. If this conversation moved you, challenged you, or gave you something to think about, please do not keep it to yourself. Share it with a colleague, a friend, a union representative, or anyone you know who is navigating the weight of debt in silence. You can follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just search for the Kwacha Podcast. On these platforms, we share episodes, updates, and continue the conversation beyond the microphone. In addition, if you want to listen at your own pace, on your commute, during lunch, or whenever life gives you a quiet moment, you can download all our episodes on Podbean. We made a deliberate choice to produce the Kwacha Podcast as an audio experience because audio travels with you. You do not need to sit down, you do not need a screen, and you do not need a very strong internet connection. Just press play and we're right there with you. This is the Kwacha Podcast. We'll be back, and until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and remember, your financial dignity is worth fighting for.